and I have at least 2 more games on the back end.
That's crazy.
Of
Wow.
Battle Realms.
That's something I did want to
Never
ask
got
you
a chance.
about. The
Sure.
story, Kenji and the Grey Bat. Where does your inspiration for these tales and these civilizations in the game come from?
If I had to dig, I think there's a couple of the I guess the short answer is way too much media as a first world child.
Okay.
Right. I mean, I have watched as a kid growing up, I have watched more martial arts flicks, swashbuckler movies. When back in the days of VHS, I actually had watched every single fantasy movie that existed at the video rental store at the time.
Holy shit.
Right. So like even the bad ones.
Right.
Right.
The ones that no one watches, the ones that are dusty in the back, and you
that we were like, okay, we've seen all of these. Yeah, we've seen all of these. Well, I guess we're watching Barbarian Brothers. All right, here we go. And you find gems. And I played a ton of D&D and other fantasy games. I still play today. I was the DM for my entire street for most of that, and so I've always loved
creating stories, universes.
Creating stories, creating worlds, creating universes, and I really fell in love with kind of trying to figure out how you get that cinematic or cinema kind of feel in video games, right? And not just in video games, in any game I was playing, right? And so we were always, I mean, we weren't the kind of, I wasn't the DM that followed the rules. I was the DM that, like Sparrow, like Jack Sparrow says, that uses them as guidelines, right? And we were always homebrewing tons of stuff. I was always making up my own rules, my own spells, my own magic items. I was always bringing new things. I remember one time when I was a kid, holy mackerel. I mean, this is a long time ago. There was some kind of TV show, Disney special. And it was like all about the villains, right? It was talking about the villains. It was like an hour-long special. And I spent that whole special writing up magic items based on what I was seeing in like the apple of poison, the woodcutter's axe, and just stuff like this. And I think where that leads me is I fell in love with this idea of Lamarckian evolution. And so at the time of Darwin, there was this other guy, Lamarck, who had another theory of evolution. And that theory of evolution basically said that the genetic mutation happens during the life of the creature. So, for example, the example that I had in the science book that I learned this in was giraffes, the neck of a giraffe, right? Darwin evolution. Yeah, Darwin evolution says that there are giraffes that are born with short, medium, and long necks, and that they have the chance of survival that's inversely proportional to that. So the longer neck giraffes are going to have a greater chance of survival, and thus a greater chance of reproducing that gene, right? That long neck gene. Well, Lamarck believed, and I know it's going to sound silly, but Lamarck believed that by stretching to reach the leaves, giraffes' necks were growing, and then they were passing that trait on. And I said, well, what if that was true? Because that seems to be how a lot of martial arts movies work, right? How many times have you seen that martial arts movie where the guy lives for 15 years with weights on his legs?
Yes.
And then all of a sudden, when they take the weights off, he can jump like 1,000 feet, right? And stuff like this, or at least that's what the martial arts movies were back in the day, right? And I love that concept, and that's what we did when I started creating the lore for the Zen masters. We kind of created this like, well, you're either following the path of yin or you're following the path of yang, and as you follow the yin or the yang path, it becomes more and more difficult to do. It's very, very hard to stay pure shadow or pure light, and as a result, inevitably you bond to something, right? And so, for example, Kazan was a character who was following the path, and then he bonded with fire, right? And so every single, and one of them bonds with poison, and one of them bonds with water, and one of them bonds with air, and one of them, and it's more bonding to a concept than an actual physical existent thing. So you can have people bonding to truth and bonding to falsehood. You see what I'm saying?
I got you.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you cut out for a moment, and now you cut out again. Oh, oh,
All right.
yeah, you're back.
My computer has decided to connect to a different to connect to my router in the main office at home.
Yeah, every time it does, I feel like I know
right here in the satellite.
I know exactly when it happens because the connection goes. You become a robot for a minute. So yeah, yeah. You were talking about the story and the origin and what kung fu movies when you were a kid. A lot of them.
Yeah. Did you get any of the yin yang?
I did. I did.
Path?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's a really long answer to say. I think inspiration comes from being inspired, right? And my first book that really inspired me was The Lord of the Rings. I mean, when I read the chapter on the Mines of Moria, like my heart was pounding. And in a lot of ways, that set of books gave me permission to have imagination, because I was growing up in a situation that was very much about being pragmatic, being, what can I do? The very of the world, very worldly, right? And that started on a journey that, I would watch so much media, read so many. I mean, I was so into D&D, I was so into fantasy, and I think all those things just kind of blended together in Battle Realms. I mean, I wanted a fantastical but martial artsy kind of thing, which is why the animations of the characters are so alive and attempting to be unrepetitive, even though they end up being repetitive because we only had a certain amount of memory. But trying to be interesting, even down to the detail of, like, for example, the archers on the dragon side, they'll shoot arrows until you get up into melee, and then they fight with martial arts.
Yeah, these concepts are actually kind of wild because the new Age of Empires 4 game has just started to recently implement some of these features that you made in your game almost 20 years ago. Now, I don't know if there's I'm sure there's games that implemented along the way, but when we talk about buildings being on fire, that's a brand new feature or that's marketed as a new feature for Age of Empires 4. The archers, turning into swordsmen when someone gets up close melee range, that's also being marketed as a new feature. So it's really interesting to see kind of where these things are originated from, right?
Yeah, I mean, if the most braggy I can get about Battle Realms is that I can say, in many ways, it's the Citizen Kane of the genre, right? It's like, if you look at it now, it looks dated, but there's a lot of concepts there that, see, and I didn't know about the Age of Empires stuff, but I used to say there's a lot of concepts there that still haven't been implemented in modern day real-time strategy, and it sounds like they are being absorbed. But I do have the great story of
the Blizzard. You told us how Blizzard delayed their game because when your game came out, they had some things they need to fix or change and
they added heroes.
Right, that was huge.
I mean, the game, the Zen Masters became the heroes of Warcraft 3, which became League of Legends. Like, they became Defense of the Ancients, that became, or Dota, and then became League of Legends.
It literally started a multi-billion-dollar genre that is still pretty alive today. Yeah, it's and then you're talking about the Lord of the Rings inspiration, then you ended up working on Lord of the Rings, which must have been surreal.
Yeah. It was wonderful. It was hard though, because what they had the book rights, not the movie rights.
Yeah.
And so there was this real difficulty. Every piece of art had to be kind of vetted, to make sure that it wasn't looking like the movie.